The day her life changed, no one asked her what she wanted. Aisha stood silently in the corner of the grand living room, her hands tightly gripping the edge of her worn apron. The marble floors beneath her feet reflected the golden lights above, but none of that shine reached her. She was just the maid, the invisible girl who cleaned, served, and stayed quiet. But today, everything felt different. The air was tense, heavy, like something was about to break. "Get ready," her employer said coldly, not even looking at her. "The guests will be here soon." Guests. Aisha knew what that meant. She had overheard enough whispers, caught enough unfinished conversations. Something was being planned, and somehow she was at the center of it. Her heart raced as she rushed to the small servant's room. She stared at herself in the cracked mirror. Simple clothes, tired eyes, a life that had never really been hers to choose. She had spent years working in this house, sending every rupee she earned back to her sick mother. Saying no was never an option. Survival didn't leave space for dreams. But marriage? The word echoed in her mind like a storm. A knock came at the door. "Hurry up," a sharp voice snapped. "They're waiting." When Aisha stepped back into the living room, everything felt unreal. Strangers filled the space, well-dressed, confident, powerful. And among them stood a man she had never seen before. He didn't look like the others. While everyone else carried an air of wealth and pride, he stood quietly, almost out of place. His clothes were simple, his posture calm. Beside him stood a little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, holding tightly onto his hand. A single father. A poor one, from the looks of it. Aisha's confusion deepened as her employer smiled, something he rarely did, and gestured toward her. "This is the girl," he said, as if presenting an object. Aisha felt her chest tighten. The man looked at her, but there was no judgment in his eyes, no arrogance, just something she couldn't quite understand. Kindness, maybe? Or was it something deeper? "This marriage will happen today," her employer continued, his tone firm, leaving no room for discussion. "It's already decided." Aisha's breath caught. Marriage. Today. To a man she didn't know. To a life she hadn't chosen. Her eyes slowly moved back to him, the quiet man holding the child hand. He gave a small nod, almost as if he understood her fear, almost as if he was silently telling her, this wasn't what it seemed. But how could it not be? He was just a poor single dad, and she was just a maid. 2 broken lives being pushed together by people who didn't care. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Because what Aisha didn't know, what no one in that room could even imagine, was that the man standing in front of her, the one wearing simple clothes and hiding behind silence, was not poor at all. In fact, he was the richest man alive. And this forced marriage? It wasn't an accident. It was the beginning of something far more powerful and far more dangerous than anyone could see coming. The room slowly emptied after the announcement, but the weight of those words stayed behind, pressing down on Aisha's chest. It didn't feel real. Just hours ago, she had been cleaning dishes in the kitchen, thinking about how to save enough money for her mother's medicine. Now, she was being told she would be married before the sun went down. She stood frozen until one of the older house staff gently touched her arm. "Go get ready," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet sympathy. "Don't make it harder for yourself." Harder? Aisha didn't even know what that meant anymore. In the small servant's room, a neatly folded outfit had been placed on her bed. It wasn't expensive, but it was far better than anything she owned. Someone had thought this through. Someone had planned every detail. That thought made her stomach twist. Who would do this? And why her? She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the clothes, her mind racing. This wasn't just about marriage. It felt like a deal, like she was being handed over for a reason she didn't understand yet. Her thoughts kept going back to him. The man. There was something strange about the way he carried himself. He didn't speak much, but he didn't seem weak either. His silence didn't feel like helplessness. It felt controlled. And the child, the little boy hadn't said a word, but his eyes had been watching everything. Not scared, not confused, just aware. Like he understood more than a child his age should. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Can I come in?" a calm voice asked. It was him. Aisha hesitated for a moment before quietly opening the door. He stood there, still simple, still calm. The little boy stood beside him, holding a small toy car in his hand. "I know this is sudden," the man said, his voice low but steady. "And I won't force you to say anything right now." Aisha looked at him, confused. No one had spoken to her like that before. Not here. "Then why is this happening?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, he didn't answer. His eyes shifted slightly, like he was choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "things are not what they look like." That wasn't an answer. Before she could ask more, footsteps echoed in the hallway. The man stepped back slightly, his expression changing just a little, like a mask falling back into place. "We'll talk later," he added quietly. "Later." The word lingered as he walked away with the child. Aisha closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Nothing made sense. Every answer only created more questions. As she got ready, the house outside grew busier. Voices, footsteps, preparations. It all sounded like a celebration. But to her, it felt like a storm building. Meanwhile, in another part of the house, her employer stood on a phone call, his voice low and serious. "Yes, it's happening today," he said. "Everything is under control." There was a pause. "No," he added firmly, glancing toward the hallway where Aisha's room was. "She doesn't know anything." Another pause. "And he?" the voice on the other end seemed to ask. Her employer's expression darkened slightly. "He knows enough," he replied. "But not everything." The call ended. Back in her room, Aisha adjusted the simple dress, her hands slightly trembling. She looked at herself one more time in the mirror, a maid about to become a wife. But deep inside, a quiet feeling began to grow. This wasn't just a forced marriage. It was something else, something hidden. And whatever truth was waiting behind it was getting closer with every passing second. By the time Aisha stepped out of her room, the house no longer felt like a place she knew. Soft lights had been turned on across the hall, and a few decorations had appeared as if overnight. It wasn't a grand wedding, but it was enough to make everything feel official, final. She walked slowly, her eyes lowered, but her mind was racing. Every step felt like it was taking her deeper into something she didn't understand. This wasn't just a forced marriage anymore. It felt like she was being pulled into a story that had already begun long before she knew about it. Near the entrance, she noticed two unfamiliar men speaking quietly. They weren't dressed like guests. Their posture was alert, their eyes constantly scanning the room. For a moment, one of them looked directly at her, then quickly looked away. Aisha felt a chill run down her spine. Who were they? This didn't feel like a normal wedding. As she moved further inside, she saw the little boy again. He was sitting on a chair, swinging his legs gently, still holding his toy car. This time, Aisha walked closer. "Hi," she said softly, unsure what else to say. The boy looked up at her, his eyes calm but curious. "Are you scared?" he asked, his voice simple and direct. The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, then gave a small, honest nod. The boy didn't look surprised. "Don't be," he said quietly. "My father doesn't let bad things happen." Aisha blinked. There was something about the way he said it. Not like a child trying to comfort someone, but like someone stating a fact. Before she could respond, the man appeared again. "Come," he said gently. "It's time." His tone was calm, but there was a firmness behind it now. Aisha followed him, her heart beating faster with every step. People gathered near a small setup in the center of the room. A simple ceremony was about to begin, but as she stood there, something else caught her attention. Her employer. He wasn't smiling anymore. He stood at a distance, watching closely, not like a proud host, but like someone waiting for something very specific to happen. His eyes kept shifting between Aisha and the man she was about to marry. It didn't feel right. At the same time, in a quiet corner of the house, one of the unfamiliar men spoke into a small device hidden near his collar. "They're moving forward," he whispered. "Everything is happening as planned." A faint voice replied, too low to understand. The man nodded slightly. "Yes, he's here." No sign that he suspects the full picture. Back in the main hall, Aisha stood beside the man, her hands slightly trembling. The words of ceremony began, but they felt distant, almost like noise fading in and out. Her thoughts were louder. Why me? Why him? Why today? She glanced at him again. Up close, she noticed small details she hadn't seen before. His watch, simple but clearly expensive, the way people unconsciously made space around him, even without realizing it, the way those watchful men seemed to always keep him within sight. This didn't match the image of a poor single dad. Not at all. Do you trust me? He asked suddenly, his voice so low only she could hear. Aisha froze. Trust? In a moment like this? I don't even know you, she whispered back. He nodded slightly, as if he expected that answer. That's fair, he said. But you're about to be part of something bigger than you think. Her breath caught. Before she could ask what he meant, a sudden noise came from outside the house. Not loud, but enough to make a few people turn their heads. The man's expression changed instantly. For the first time, Aisha saw something break through his calm. Concern. Real, sharp concern. The little boy, standing nearby now, tightened his grip on his toy car. And across the room, her employer's lips slowly curled into a small, unreadable smile. Something was about to happen. Something no one had prepared her for. And somehow, Aisha knew this marriage wasn't just a decision. It was the center of a plan she still couldn't see. The sound outside came again, this time clearer. Not loud, but deliberate, like a signal. Aisha's heartbeat quickened. The room, which had been filled with quiet ceremony a moment ago, shifted almost instantly. Conversations paused. Eyes moved. Something invisible had just changed. The man beside her straightened slightly, his calm now sharper, more alert. His hand moved subtly toward the little boy, pulling him closer without drawing attention. Stay near me, he murmured. Aisha heard it, and for some reason she listened. At the far end of the hall, the front door opened. One of the unfamiliar men stepped inside quickly, his face tense. He didn't speak right away, but his eyes locked onto the man Aisha was about to marry. A small nod passed between them. Quick, almost unnoticeable to anyone else. But Aisha saw it. This wasn't random. This was planned or expected. Her employer stepped forward, clapping his hands once, forcing a smile back onto his face. It's nothing, he said smoothly. Just a small delay outside. Please, let's continue. But his voice didn't match his eyes. He looked impatient, like something was taking longer than it should. Aisha's mind raced. Every piece was starting to feel connected, but the picture still didn't make sense. A forced marriage. A poor single dad who clearly wasn't what he seemed. Strange men watching everything. And now, whatever was happening outside, her breath felt shallow. What is going on? She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The man beside her glanced at her again. This time, there was no hiding it. You're in the middle of something important, he said quietly. And right now you're safer than you think. Safer? That word didn't comfort her. It made everything feel more dangerous. Before she could ask anything else, another sound came, closer now. The faint rumble of vehicles stopping outside the house. More than one. The room fell into a strange silence. Even the guests could feel it now. The little boy looked up at his father. Is it them? He asked softly. The man didn't answer right away, but his silence said enough. Across the room, Aisha noticed her employer again. This time, he wasn't pretending anymore. His expression had shifted completely. The polite mask was gone. In its place was something colder, calculating. His gaze moved toward the door, then back to the man standing beside Aisha. There was tension there. Something personal, something deeper than business. You didn't think it would be that easy, her employer said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. A few guests looked confused. Others slowly began stepping back. Aisha felt her stomach drop. This wasn't about her marriage. Not really. This was about him, the man she was about to marry. He took a slow step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Aisha and the child. His calm had returned, but now it felt different, stronger, like he was no longer hiding. I was hoping you wouldn't do this here, he replied, his tone steady. Do what? Aisha's voice trembled. No one answered her. Outside, a car door slammed. Then another. Footsteps. Getting closer. Inside the house, the tension snapped tight like a rope about to break. The unfamiliar men moved slightly, positioning themselves without causing panic. They weren't guests. They were protection. Aisha's hands began to shake. Her eyes moved between the two men, her employer and the man beside her. And suddenly, it hit her. This forced marriage, this entire situation. It wasn't just control. It was a trap built around one man. And she had been placed right in the center of it. The front door slowly began to open again. No one moved. No one spoke. And in that heavy, silent moment, just before everything was about to collide, Aisha realized something that made her chest tighten with fear. She still didn't know which side she was really on. The door creaked open just enough for a shadow to slip inside. No one breathed. Aisha felt her pulse in her ears as a man stepped into the light. He wasn't dressed like the others. No uniform, no formal suit, just simple clothes that somehow made him stand out even more. His eyes moved across the room slowly, carefully, until they landed on the man standing beside her. And then he smiled, not warmly, not kindly, like he had finally found what he came for. Well, he said, his voice calm but carrying through the silence, "This saves me a lot of time." Aisha's fingers curled tightly at her sides. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in. The man beside her didn't move. But something in his posture shifted again, firmer now, like he had stepped fully into whatever role he'd been hiding. "You shouldn't be here," he said. The newcomer shrugged lightly. "And yet, here I am." Behind him, more figures appeared near the doorway. They didn't rush in. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to send a clear message. This was no accident. Across the room, Aisha's employer let out a slow breath, almost relieved. "I was starting to think you wouldn't show up," he said, stepping forward. His voice had changed completely now, no trace of politeness left. "I kept my end of the deal." Deal. The word hit Aisha like a sudden drop. Her eyes snapped toward him. "What deal?" she whispered, her voice shaking. No one answered her. But the man at the door did glance at her this time. Really look at her. His expression shifted slightly, curiosity mixing with something sharper. "So this is the girl," he said. Aisha instinctively took a small step back. The man beside her reacted instantly, his hand tightening slightly as he moved just enough to shield her again. "She has nothing to do with this," he said, his voice lower now, control but carrying a warning. "Doesn't she?" the newcomer replied, tilting his head. "From where I'm standing, she has everything to do with it." Aisha's confusion deepened into something heavier, fear mixed with realization. Her gaze slowly turned toward her employer again. "You planned this?" she asked, her voice barely holding steady. He didn't deny it. Instead, he gave a small, cold smile. "You were the only way to get him here without suspicion," he said simply. "A quiet maid. No questions. No attention. Perfect." The words felt like a blow. Aisha's chest tightened as everything started falling into place, but in the worst way possible. This wasn't just a forced marriage. She had been used, carefully placed into a plan she never saw coming. Her eyes moved back to the man she was about to marry. For the first time, she saw it clearly, the truth behind the calm, behind the silence. He wasn't just important. He was the target, the richest man alive, standing in a room where everyone suddenly seemed to know exactly who he was, except her. The little boy stepped closer to him, his small hand gripping tightly now. Even he looked different. No longer just a quiet child, but someone who understood the danger around them. "You promised this would stay clean," the man beside Aisha said, his voice now colder, directed at her employer. "And you believe that?" her employer replied, almost amused. "You really thought you could hide forever?" The tension in the room sharpened. The men near the door shifted slightly, as if waiting for a signal. The ones inside the house adjusted their positions too, subtle but ready. Aisha felt trapped between two sides she didn't understand. "Why now?" the man asked. The newcomer at the door answered this time. "Because secrets don't stay hidden forever," he said. "And yours is worth more than everything in this room." Silence followed. Heavy. Dangerous. Aisha's breathing grew uneven as her mind struggled to keep up. Every second was pulling her deeper into something far beyond her life as a maid, beyond this forced marriage, beyond anything she had imagined. And then the newcomer took a slow step forward. "Let's stop pretending," he said, his eyes fixed on the man in front of her. "You're not just a single father." A pause, a slight shift in the air. "Tell them who you really are." Aisha's heart nearly stopped, because in that moment, she realized whatever truth was about to come out next was going to change everything. The silence stretched for a second too long. Then the man beside Aisha let out a slow breath. "You're right," he said calmly. Every eye in the room locked onto him. He gently moved the little boy behind him, then stepped forward, no longer hiding, no longer pretending. The quiet, simple man who had walked in earlier was gone. In his place stood someone else entirely. Someone who didn't need to prove anything. "My name isn't just what you think it is," he continued, his voice steady but carrying a quiet authority. "And I didn't come here by accident." A small shift moved through the room. Even the man at the door seemed more alert now. "You wanted me here," he added, glancing briefly at Aisha's employer. "So here I am." The newcomer near the door gave a faint smile. Finally, Aisha's heart pounded. She didn't fully understand everything, but she knew one thing now. This man wasn't weak, and he wasn't trapped. He had walked into this on purpose. "You built a trap," he said, his gaze steady. "But you forgot something." A slight pause. "I've seen worse." Before anyone could react, the energy in the room shifted again, fast as time. The men who had been quietly standing around the house moved in sync, stepping forward with calm precision. The ones at the door hesitated. Just for a moment, it was enough. This wasn't chaos. It was control. "You really thought I'd come alone?" the man said, his tone still calm. Aisha blinked as she noticed it clearly now. The subtle signals, the positions, the timing, the so-called guests, the quiet watchers, they weren't random. They were his. Her employer's expression finally cracked. "You," he started, but stopped. The plan had turned. The trap had reversed. The man at the door took a step back, his confidence slipping just slightly. "This doesn't change anything," he said, trying to hold control. "You're still here." "Yes," the man replied. "And so are you." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the tension broke. The men near the door lowered their stance. Not defeated, but no longer in control. The balance had shifted completely. Aisha stood frozen, her mind racing as everything came together. The forced marriage, the quiet arrival, the strange behavior. It hadn't been about forcing him into something. It had been about pulling him out, into the open, into a place where everyone who was watching him could finally be seen. Her employer took a step back, his voice no longer steady. "You used this," he said, almost in disbelief. "You used her." Aisha felt the words hit her chest. Her eyes moved slowly toward the man beside her. For a brief moment, something passed across his face. Not guilt, but something close to it. "I protected her," he said quietly. The words were simple, but they didn't erase the truth. Aisha swallowed, her emotions tangled. She had been part of this without knowing, used by one side and protected by the other, but never asked. The little boy stepped forward then, holding onto his father's hand again. "It's over, right?" he asked softly. The man looked down at him, then back at the room. "It's over," he said. And just like that, the tension that had filled the space began to fade. The danger didn't disappear completely, but it no longer felt like it was about to explode. People started moving again, slowly, carefully. The storm had passed, but something else remained. Aisha stood there, still trying to understand where she fit in all of this. The marriage, the lies, the truth. She looked at him one last time. "You knew," she said quietly. "From the beginning." He didn't deny it. "I knew enough," he replied. That answer stayed with her. Not everything, just enough. A strange silence settled between them. And then, just as everything seemed to be ending, her employer laughed. Not loudly, not wildly, but enough to stop everyone again. "You think this was a whole plan?" he said, his voice low, almost amused. The room froze once more. Aisha felt a chill run through her. The man beside her didn't move, but his eyes sharpened again. "What do you mean?" he asked. Her employer's smile slowly returned, calmer this time, confident. "You came here because you thought you were exposing us," he said. "But you never asked why I was so willing to lose." A pause. Then his gaze shifted directly to Aisha, and for the first time, real fear settled in her chest. "Because she," he said quietly, "was never just a bait." The words hit harder than anything before. Aisha's breath caught. Her mind raced. If she wasn't just part of the trap, then what was she? And why did it feel like the real story hadn't ended yet? The room went completely still. Aisha felt every eye turned toward her, and for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt exposed, like a secret she didn't even know she carried was about to be revealed. "What do you mean?" the man beside her asked, his voice controlled but sharper now. Her employer took a slow step forward, his confidence returning in a way that made the air feel heavy again. "You spent years hiding your identity," he said. "The richest man alive, living like a poor single dad. Careful, untouchable, always one step ahead." His gaze flickered toward Aisha again. "But even you didn't know the truth sitting right in front of you." Aisha's heart pounded. "I don't understand what truth." For a moment, no one spoke. Then her employer reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. "I didn't choose her randomly," he said. "I searched for her." He held the envelope up slightly. "Years ago, a name disappeared from records connected to a very powerful legacy. A child, hidden, forgotten, erased to protect something far bigger than money." Aisha felt her breath catch. "No," she whispered. The man beside her slowly took the envelope, his eyes scanning it quickly. For the first time since all this began, something real showed on his face. Shock. "This can't be," he said quietly. But it was. Aisha stepped back slightly, her mind spinning. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked at her. Really looked this time. Not as part of a plan. Not as someone to protect, but as someone he was just beginning to understand. "This says," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "you were born into the same network of wealth and power that I walked away from." The words didn't feel real. A maid, a forgotten girl, connected to something that big. "I don't remember anything," she said softly, shaking her head. "I've always been just me." "That's the point," her employer replied. "You were hidden before you could remember, protected from enemies and from people like him." The man's jaw tightened slightly. "You used her to draw me out," he said. "And to remind you," the employer answered calmly, "that no one escapes this world completely." Silence filled the room again, but this time it felt different. The danger was gone, but the truth was heavier. Aisha stood there, her thoughts slowly settling into something clearer. She had been used, yes, but she wasn't powerless. Not anymore. She looked at the man, the one who had entered her life as a poor single dad, hiding the truth that he was the richest man alive. "You said I was safe," she told him quietly. "I meant it," he replied. "And now?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, gently, he said, "Now you have a choice." That word hit deeper than anything else. Choice. Something she had never really had before. Around them, the tension fully faded. The men who had filled the room slowly stepped back. The plan, the trap, the secrets, it had all come into the open. Her employer no longer looked powerful, just defeated in a different way. "You can walk away from this," the man said to her. "From all of it, or you can face it on your own terms." The little boy walked up to her then, holding his toy car out slightly. "You're not alone," he said simply. Aisha looked at him, then back at the man, then around the room that had once felt like a cage. For the first time, it didn't feel like one anymore. She took a slow breath. "I've spent my whole life living someone else's decisions," she said softly. "I think it's time I make my own." The man gave a small nod. No pressure, no control, just understanding. And in that moment, everything changed. The forced marriage that began as a trap had turned into something else entirely. A turning point. Not about wealth, not about power, but about truth and identity. Aisha didn't have all the answers yet, but she had something more important. a future she could finally choose. And as she walked forward, leaving behind the life that had been decided for her, one thing became clear. Sometimes the biggest secrets aren't about who you're forced to become, but about who you were all along.